What up, Vibers? It's Kai. Welcome to another episode of the Vibe with Kai podcast. In today's episode, we're diving into generational trauma, mental illness, and what it means to finally tell the truth, even when it's a little bit messy. I'm joined by Lauren Henry Brehm, author of The French Court, a raw and powerful memoir about growing up in a family shaped by untreated OCD and mental illness. Her story is honest, it's moving, it's deeply human, and we're talking survival, healing, and how to break cycles that feel impossible to escape. I want to welcome our guest today, Lauren Henry Brehm, to the show. Hi, Lauren. Thank you for hanging out with me today.
Well, hi, Kai. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We were saying right before we started recording that we both have little critters that love to make an appearance. Usually my cats, when they hear me either on a FaceTime call or recording one of these sessions, they'll just assume that sometimes I'm talking to them. So they'll just come sit by my side and just like looking up at me like this, and they'll start making noises.
Right. The cat will get on my lap, but
Uh-huh.
my dog is just a 17-month-old puppy, and so she
Oh,
comes up
wow.
for hugs.
Oh, but you know what? I feel like dogs deserve it. Like, I just feel
Oh,
like that's totally okay.
yeah. I would never chase her away for wanting a hug.
Yeah. Yeah. Lauren, I want to start from the top here, about the French court, right? I want to talk about, uh, explain to the people, what is the French court and how did it become the lens through which your story is told?
Well, this was an analogy my father came up with to
Mm-hmm.
explain my mother's family. They
Mm-hmm.
divorced after 6 years of marriage, and he felt like he had to explain some things. And
Mm-hmm.
as he put it, when someone is mentally ill enough to think that they are Napoleon, you have two courses of action. You can get them help so they learn that no, they're not Napoleon and they
Mm-hmm.
resume their own identity, or you can establish a French court and treat them as if they were Napoleon. Now, the delusional part of my grandmother's illness had to do with her firm belief that everything she was doing was perfectly normal,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't. Um, and so it was in the sense of catering to her, to that belief, that's very skewed perception, that my family became a French court serving her needs.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because, like, I'm curious, when did you realize, like, that you grew up with this literal French court built around your grandmother's untreated OCD? When did you realize it wasn't just quirky, but it was something deeper?
I'm going to say it was after we left New York City for North Carolina, because at that
Mm-hmm.
point, we didn't see grandma and grandpa for a couple of hours for visits. They
Right.
came down to North Carolina and would spend 3 or 4 months. So at that point, I started really being exposed to what these oddnesses were, what those quirks
Mm-hmm.
were in a larger context. Uh,
Right.
her routines, which is a big part of OCD anyway, she didn't actually carry out her routines. She roped her family into doing these things for her. After grandpa died,
Mm-hmm.
we had to hire a series of what my ex-husband and I called keepers, people who
Mm-hmm.
just do these things that she felt she needed done. Um,
Right.
so it was around um, tween early teens that I started really picking that up,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
knowing that it was not normal.
Yeah, it's great because I read a lot, right? And I always appreciate the forms of writing that people will take just to kind of tell a story. For you, you describe your book as a memoir in essays. And I'm really curious, as a writer, why did that form feel right for this story instead of the traditional narrative or novel?
Well, my style of writing is always starting with essays. So I'll
Mm-hmm.
take a specific point and develop that, maybe 1,000 words, more or less, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'm able to find the narrative thread. So it
Mm-hmm.
was more of a novel. For this one, each different episode felt so separate, like describing my grandmother's illness. In the one of the early chapters is called "Choke and Die," the
Mm-hmm.
house OCD built. Um, that didn't really fit with anything else, but it was essential information, and that's kind of what happened as all of these essays developed. I
Mm-hmm.
realized grandma is the through line in all of it, but it wasn't a linear story, so I left it
Mm-hmm.
in the essays. That just
Yeah.
it seemed to work. One of the things I asked my editor was, does this work like this, or should I be trying harder to make it a narrative? And she liked the format, so
Mm-hmm.
I kept with it.
There you go. They got that validation there, right? Thank
Yeah,
you, editor.
exactly.
Was there a specific moment, either heartbreaking or freeing for you, when you decided I really need to write this down? Was there a specific moment that you can think of?
I don't think there really was. It was more the cumulative effect of years of therapy, because
Mm-hmm.
all of my therapists, as we got into that part of the story, said there is nothing like this in the literature. One of my psychiatrists labeled my grandmother as having OCD by proxy,
Mm-hmm.
which doesn't exist. But
Mm-hmm.
that's exactly what she did. She had other people carrying out her compulsions.
Right.
So I honestly think it was the weight of that, and eventually realizing that I could tell the story. I kept thinking somebody else has to tell this story,
Yeah.
but I eventually developed the confidence to say, well, I'm going to try and see
Mm-hmm.
if I can do justice to it, and I think I did.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting that you said what was OCD by proxy, which is really interesting because your grandmother's OCD didn't just obviously affect her; it became the blueprint for your entire family's world. How does a family even begin to recognize when a coping system has become a prison?
I'm not sure,
Mm-hmm.
honestly. I know my grandfather ran away from home a few times.
Mm-hmm.
Once when my mother and her sister were teenagers, once shortly before my parents got married, and once just before we left New York City for North Carolina. There may have been other times, but those are the three I know about. Um, and they were triggered by grandpa just figuratively throwing up his hands, saying, I can't do this anymore, and then literally leaving. Uh,
Yeah.
the girls, my aunt is the older girl by 3 years. They were also imposed upon, and I think the same placidity that my grandfather
Mm-hmm.
had that kept him from standing up to his wife also kept him from protecting the girls.
Uh-huh.
So when he didn't want to participate anymore, things got shifted to first the older girl, my aunt, and then to the younger one, my mother. And my mother has always had a very passive kind of personality, but
Mm-hmm.
with that comes passive aggression. So
Mm-hmm.
she would be manipulative and sneaky, but she could never say no.
Right.
And that's really where the issue comes from. I don't know how they coped.
Right.
I think maybe they made decisions day to day that, yeah, this is what we're gonna do.
Sure, sure. So we talked about a lot about your family, but for you personally, you write a lot about your own depression and suicidal ideations with very brutal honesty, which I very much appreciate because I always applaud the bravery that it takes to do those things. What has helped you stay here even when your brain was telling you not to?
Oh, yeah, there's somebody talking.
Yep, there's one.
um, I've always thought of myself as a very strong person that,
Mhm.
there's an iron core that can't be broken. Well, it did break. at certain points.
Mhm.
Um, but what I've recognized is that healing, I guess to borrow a phrase, isn't the destination. Healing is a journey.
Mhm.
It doesn't end. You can never say, I am totally well now, I'm totally healed. You learn coping skills.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for me personally, self talk is one of my problems because I'm so negative toward myself. Um, and depression feeds into that. If
Mhm.
I'm feeling that helplessness and hopelessness that is characteristic of depression, it's very easy for me to turn that in on myself.
Yeah.
That, well, I
Mhm.
feel that way because I'm not worthy.
Mhm.
Learning that therapy is a tool toward healing has been a good mindset change for me. So, learning
Mhm.
more positive ways to take care of myself. We
Yeah.
joke about uh, taking care of our inner child. I can take care of my inner adult too.
Yes. Yes.
Grown up Lauren needs that kind of love too. So I'm still 66 years old, still learning to love myself.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that's great because I talk a lot about how because I was diagnosed ADHD, severe depression, generalized anxiety disorder, and existential OCD. I was diagnosed way later in life, in my late 30s, and it's so interesting how getting diagnosed in life is kind of like putting on glasses and you're able to see for the first time. You're able to see things a lot clearly and understand why. Like you go a
Yes.
lot of your life not understanding the why. And if I'm not mistaken, you're diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Um did that diagnosis did that help you connect the
Oh,
dots
oh,
for you?
yes.
Yeah.
I have always been unsuccessful in my career. I was a special education teacher and then
Yeah.
became an English as a second language teacher. And my teaching was always fine, but my supervisors would talk to me about staff perception. That was the phrase
Mm,
that was used, that somehow I wasn't fitting in, I wasn't part of the team. And nobody would ever give me a specific incident or say, well, you
mhm.
did this and it had this effect. I never got that kind of constructive information.
Right.
And at 58 years old, I suddenly went, oh, I might be autistic. I
Mhm.
was actually researching some ideas for helping a student of mine that I suspected was on the spectrum. But as I'm reading all of these things to help him, I'm going, that's me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I worked very quickly. Within 8 months, I had a diagnosis, but I was 59 years old.
Mhm.
And I was able to look back at that point. There is a dog over here. um, it's just shift. Oh, now she got off. Anyway, but I was able to look back and realize, oh my gosh, that explains everything that happened in the past.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't even know for certain if I'm actually if I have depression just all by itself, or if it's a reaction to living for so many years without fitting
Mhm.
in and without knowing why.
Right, right,
So,
right.
I mean, the medications help a tremendous amount. I My reaction to initially being medicated for depression was so dramatic that the psychiatrist who was helping me at that time labeled it as chronic low level lifelong depression.
Yeah.
And that fit with the story my mother had about my personality changing at 16 months old. However, if you've dealt with a lot of parents of young children on the spectrum, they talk about personality changes at about a year and a
Mhm.
half.
Sure.
So I have no idea which one was going on, but apparently
Yeah.
I've never been anything close to normal.
Neither have I. So you listen, you and I think
Yeah.
normal's overrated. I don't. It's overrated. I feel like you're like me. I'm proud of my uniqueness and my unique brain. It took me a while to get there, but
Yes,
and
it does.
you had mentioned being a teacher, and you were, now let's not underplay like some of the teaching you did, because you were a teacher across Alaska, China, beyond. Like it wasn't just like one area. Like you were
Right.
experiencing so many different cultures, right? And so I'm curious, like, did witnessing kids from all different types of cultures shape how you view mental illness in families?
I'm not sure I really made a connection. Well, I did have students who definitely
Mm-hmm.
suffered from some kind of, let's say, mental health challenge. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, they had diagnoses that came from the DSM-5,
Right,
including
right.
ADHD, autism, a variety
Uh-huh.
of learning disabilities. Um, I had one student that I am absolutely convinced was transgender, and I
Mm-hmm.
wonder what happened to him as I knew
Yeah.
him. But he would tell you, 5-year-old kid, he would tell you when he grew up he wanted to be a mommy,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's just his whole orientation was identifying as female. So I've
Mm-hmm.
had students with a wide range of both mental conditions and educational
Mm-hmm.
handicaps, or
Yeah.
strengths. I'm not sure that I necessarily connected those experiences with how do you heal from mental illness. Also, I
Right,
didn't
right.
know their own generational stories that well.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That makes sense. I'm curious, as you were writing this, obviously, like whenever you write a book or anything really, you end up learning more about yourself, and and because you're able to contextualize a lot of things that maybe just lived in your head, and all of that. How did writing this book help you understand your family and maybe even yourself in a new way?
When I started putting all of those little essays, all these disparate ideas together, and I
Mm-hmm.
started seeing the picture, that's what really helped me. Which
Yeah.
is why I've submitted a couple of the individual essays for like writing contests, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, all of it needs to be together because it's a complete portrait.
Mm-hmm.
And once I was able to start seeing that portrait, one of the first things I picked up on was negative attitudes toward men from my grandmother and my mother.
Mm-hmm.
And I could
Uh-huh.
imagine my mother picked it up from her mother, but I
Right.
couldn't figure out where grandma's issues with men were coming from.
Sure.
And as I started doing research, I realized she was likely the victim of incest, which means she wasn't just the victimizer. Up until that moment,
Mm-hmm.
she was the villain in the story.
Yeah.
But recognizing that she was also a victim opened up compassion for her, that
Mm-hmm.
she was suffering just as much as she caused suffering.
Right, right. I always love to think about like what I would tell myself when I was younger, knowing what I know now, right? And it's, I know it's such a cliche thing to think about, but I do think about it, because sometimes it helps me when I'm talking to younger people, about my struggles and my journey. And I'm curious for you, if you could go back and whisper something into little Lauren's ear, the one growing up in the French court, what would you say to her?
I'm I'm not entirely sure. Um, the thing I wish I had could change about the past is knowing decades earlier that I was on the
Hmm.
spectrum. Of
Sure.
course, elementary school in the 1960s, even if someone noticed I was odd, it wouldn't have fit the definitions of autism at the time.
Right, right.
So that might not have helped me. I think just maybe reminding myself to believe in myself,
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
trust myself. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not sure
Yeah.
there's much else I could say
Sure, that makes sense.
because the help that little Lauren needed just wasn't available.
Sure, that makes sense. I'm curious, what do you feel are the is the biggest myth about family and mental illness that you're hoping that this book would maybe help destroy?
That if you ignore it, it will go away.
Mhm.
That it's not just a personality quirk. There are disease processes at work here, and the mental diseases, mental illness is no different than a physical illness. There are
Mhm.
plenty of physical illnesses you can't see, but they're still there. If you have a heart condition, for example,
Mhm.
you have to be careful. You might need a handicap placard for parking,
Right.
all sorts of things, but your disability is invisible. And it's the same thing with mental illness. If you're bleeding, you get help.
Yes.
But if you're coping with anxiety or trying to overcome the inertia of depression, you don't get help.
Right.
So, yeah, you can't
Mhm.
ignore it out of existence.
Yeah. I quite often will compare mental health to physical health because sometimes that helps people to understand what's happening. Like I always compare it to like having a broken arm, right? Like maybe oh, God willing the bone isn't protruding, but like it might be broken under the skin. You can't see it, right? But you feel this pain on the inside. And so like if you walk up to somebody and you say, "Hey, my I think my arm is broken." um they usually don't question it. Like they'll just kind of like, oh, okay, well, let's get you help, let's go get you, a CAT scan, let's take you to the hospital. And like it's pretty much an
Right.
immediate thing, even though they cannot see it. They can't see the broken bone. Why can't we view mental health the same way? Like, why do you have to always see it in order for you to go get help for it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it really
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
Um, it's easy to ignore something that you can't see and can't
Mm-hmm.
measure. I mean, even with the
Mm-hmm.
broken arm, get it under an X-ray and you go, "Oh, yeah,
Right.
there it is."
Right.
Don't
Right.
have that kind of clear-cut diagnostic material. Everything is always an inference.
Mm-hmm.
So many of these things you take a survey or you interview with a psychiatrist or a
Yeah.
psychologist and they quantify it and they give it a number, but it's still a number based on something that's nebulous. you
Yeah.
you don't get
Mm-hmm.
hard concrete data that says
Mm-hmm.
yes, this person has this and no, this person does not. So it's just harder, and we have generations, well, centuries of stigma attached to mental illness
Mm-hmm.
that, I mean, look at our words: lunacy, crazy,
Mhm.
nuts, all of these
Yeah.
things to describe, but very few positive things about
Yeah.
the process. I was a bit unusual for my generation in going to therapy. I think boomers in general
Sure.
started
Mhm.
going into therapy,
Mhm.
but then I look at my daughter who, when she needed help, she went for it. She
Right.
knew where to go, she knew how to pursue it. Ah, yes, there's a dog. Yeah.
Hi, you. Oh,
Her name is
adorable.
Shenanigans, otherwise known as
That is
Nana.
a great name. Hi, Shenanigans.
Okay, Nana off. Thank you. Anyway, um, you'll have to remind me where we were.
I listen. I have ADHD, so like it would like it's out of
Wherever.
my head now. But but I'm one of the things that I read. You said that your story isn't about giving advice, but it's about telling the truth. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Um, I don't feel at all qualified to advise someone else on how they should deal with these problems in their families or how they should deal
Mm-hmm.
with their own problems. Because I can't say I've been entirely successful in dealing with
I don't.
mine.
Who has?
I've
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I've made good strides, but the story's not over yet. Um, and I'm sorry, what was the point of that?
Oh, just talking a little bit about how your story isn't about giving advice, but it's
Yes.
about telling your truth.
Well, and I think just by sharing the story as I have done, it should resonate with people. If
Mm-hmm.
my readers can understand both the problem and the steps towards solution, if they can relate to that, then I've done what I set out to do. When I've
Mm-hmm.
done book signings, and of course, Fairbanks is a relatively small area, even though it's a large town in
Mm-hmm.
Alaska. But when I've done book signings, I get into wonderful conversations, and I often will hand them my business card and say, let me know how this touches you. Let me know if you
Mm-hmm.
want to talk.
Mm-hmm.
Those connections are the most healing.
Yeah, yeah. Which I love being able to connect with the people that like read your work or support you, because there's quite often people will reach out to me sometimes, like they'll see some of my videos online and they'll tell their story, or they'll say, hey, thank you for telling your story, because like I didn't know this and that. And since you get the chance to speak with a lot of people that have read your book and or know your story, can you remember any reactions from somebody that read your book that just stands out to you? Like, has anybody shared their story after reading yours?
Not too much because I see
Mm-hmm.
them at the point that they're buying the book, so they haven't read it yet.
Right, right, right. Mm-hmm.
But when we have conversations at these book signings, um, they start disclosing a little bit of themselves,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that I have already done that they're
Yeah.
holding in their hand my whole story. Um, so far, I haven't heard that I impacted somebody after they read it, only
Mm-hmm.
that they were curious to see what I had to say because they knew it was
Sure.
going to relate to themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I get the feeling sometimes it can feel like this sense of being trapped in someone else's reality, right? When you're growing up with a family that prioritizes someone else's um brain over the truth. Um, in the essays, there is a sense of that. So, like, what's it like to relive that? Like every time that, like, when you're writing these things, is it hard to relive that?
Yes. In a
Mm-hmm.
quick answer, yes.
Yeah.
Um, I had to do a lot of digging to find where the story was. Really,
Yeah.
there were so many things, and as a child, I loved my grandmother and grandfather. I knew my
Mm-hmm.
grandmother was a little difficult to get along with,
Mm-hmm.
but I still enjoyed her attention, and she was very much a doting grandmother. It was only
Mm-hmm.
when I started to see the other factors in there that I drew a little bit of distance.
Yeah.
I looked at her more critically. I think that's probably what, 12, 13-year-olds do with everybody. All of these
Mm-hmm.
people you've accepted as authorities all your life
Yeah.
suddenly come across as human, just
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
imperfect, fallible,
Yeah.
uh,
It's a genuine
no
thing.
longer
Mm-hmm.
right. It's
Mm-hmm.
just what happens at that age. In my case, there was a lot more to the story.
Mm-hmm.
And so looking through my memories, it's almost like going through file drawers. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
this one is important. No, this one's sweet, but it's not important.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so yeah, there was
Right.
a lot of um, there were those moments of self-recognition where you get a chill down your spine because this matters. This made me who I
Mm-hmm.
am, and this made my
Yeah.
family who they are.
Right. For those watching and listening, again, the book is called The French Court. And I'm going to include a link for it in the description of this podcast. So all you have to do is click and get more information about it and get your copy. Lauren, if someone's never heard your story, like this is the first time that they're hearing about you and your story, and they click the link in the description and they buy your book today, what do you hope that they feel after reading that last page?
More than anything, compassion.
Mm,
Compassion for anyone who is struggling with a mental illness, but also compassion for my grandmother,
mm-hmm,
for as many horrible things as she subjected her family to, recognizing that we're all victims of our own
yeah,
upbringing. And obviously she was, and I know nothing about her father to know what caused him to molest his daughter, but that
mm-hmm,
tells me it goes back even further generations.
yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
compassion is probably the number one response I would like.
Yeah. I'm trying not to look at him because if I give him attention, he's going to just keep going. So I'm like looking out the corner of my eye.
Well, the dog is curious about where's the kitty.
Yeah, it's no, I totally get what you're saying, and I hope that people will feel that compassion too as they, read through the book. Again, the book I, I just got totally distracted from I'm like such thinking about my cat right now. But again, the book is called The French Court. And one last question for you, Lauren, before we go. If there's one legacy that you hope the book leaves, not just for your readers, but for your daughter, your grandson, your whole family, what is that? What is that one legacy? Is it compassion?
I think even beyond compassion, it's recognizing that everybody is struggling.
Mm-hmm.
Some there's a long family history. I think most there's some family factors.
Sure.
But even if you're the first one in the family who's ever dealt with a mental illness, it's okay. It's I mean, I can't figure out what I'm trying to say here.
No, I get it. I get what you're saying. It really it is okay. Like it's I think a lot of times people will feel alone in their mental health journey. Like even when they're surrounded by people, it's so easy to still feel alone. And under like knowing like understanding that like there is help. And this story is not unfamiliar to a lot of people.
So I had reason to write down yesterday that depression is lonely. And
Yeah.
when you're
Mm,
deeper into it, you don't have any real awareness of the people around you. They can't reach out and help you. I'm hoping that other people reading my words will find a connection, something that keeps them from being less lonely.
yeah.
And that's, to me, that's the absolute difference between someone who carries out a suicide plan and someone
Hmm.
who's able to stop it. But the people around you aren't the ones who can give you that connection because they really don't necessarily know what's going on. Hey, baby.
Yeah. No, Lauren, I appreciate you, and I thank you for sharing so much of your heart and your story and your truth, not just today, but in this book. And I'm a firm believer that courage is contagious, right? And I know that there's going to be a lot of people that are listening and watching right now that are feeling a little bit more seen because of you, right? And because of the work that you've done and the story that you're telling. So if you're listening right now, if you want to dive deeper into Lauren's world, make sure you grab her book, The French Court: Essays from One Family's Legacy of Mental Illness. It's available now wherever books are sold. And again, I'm going to include the link in the description of this podcast. So all you have to do is go click. And you can also go visit Lauren's website where you can get even more information to my vibers, if this episode today sparked something for you, I'd love to hear about it. I would love for you to share your story. I'd love for you to send your questions. Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you haven't already, make sure you hit that follow button and leave a quick rating or review. That way we can reach more people with these really important conversations. Lauren, thank you again for hanging out with me. Thank you. And
Oh, thank you. It's
shenanigans.
been a yes, she's here too. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, no, really. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. As always, my friends, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Much love, good vibes, and I will talk to you later. Goodbye.